The air inside Hangar 17 was thick with the ghosts of forgotten journeys. For decades, it had stood at the edge of the old Al Zurqa airfield, a place the desert was slowly reclaiming. Sunlight struggled through grimy, cracked panes of glass high in the arched ceiling, illuminating dancing columns of dust. It smelled of decay, cold metal, and time itself. This was exactly the kind of place that drew in people like Marcus Vance, a freelance photojournalist with a passion for industrial ruins. He wasn't looking for treasure. He was hunting for stories trapped in rust and concrete. On this particular Tuesday, he'd managed to convince the airfield's elderly caretaker to let him have a look around, a permission granted with a shrug and a warning about bad floors and worse memories. Hangar 17 was the last on his list. Its colossal sliding doors were rusted shut, but a smaller, man-sized door in its side yielded with a groan of tortured metal. Marcus stepped inside, his camera ready. The space was cavernous, and for a moment he thought it was empty. Then, as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw it. It wasn't a wreck. It wasn't a collection of parts. It was a whole, intact cargo plane, a quad-engine turboprop behemoth that filled the hangar from wall to wall. Its dull, unmarked gray fuselage seemed to absorb the weak light, giving it a spectral, almost unreal quality. The tires, though coated in a thick layer of dust, were fully inflated. The propellers were poised as if ready to spin to life. It looked less abandoned and more paused, as if the crew had simply stepped out for a coffee and never returned. Marcus slowly walked the length of the aircraft, his footsteps echoing in the profound silence. He was no aviation expert, but he knew one thing. Every plane has an identity. A tail number, an airline livery, a national flag. This one had nothing. The skin was a sterile, anonymous gray. There were no logos, no call signs, no registration marks painted on the tail or fuselage. It was a blank slate, a ghost. He peered into the cockpit window. The flight deck was pristine, albeit dusty. No logbooks on the seats, no stray papers. In the cargo bay, which he accessed through an unlocked ramp, he found nothing. It was cavernous and empty, swept clean. This machine, a marvel of engineering worth millions, was sitting in a derelict hangar, belonging to no one, registered in no country, with a history that had been deliberately and meticulously erased. It was more than just an old plane. It was a riddle cast in aluminum and steel, a machine that, according to every law of modern aviation, simply should not exist. The first question wasn't who did it belong to, but a far more fundamental one. How is this even possible? To understand why the discovery in Hangar 17 sent quiet shockwaves through the aviation community, you have to understand one fundamental principle. In the modern world, there is no such thing as an anonymous airplane. For the general public, the system that governs this is largely invisible, yet it's one of the most robust and strictly enforced regulatory frameworks on the planet. Think of it like a car's license plate and vehicle identification number, VIN, rolled into one, but on a global scale and with far more serious implications. Every single civilian aircraft, from a tiny two-seater Cessna to the largest Airbus A380, must be registered in a specific country. This isn't just a suggestion. It's a non-negotiable law, managed internationally by the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, a specialized agency of the United Nations. This registration gives the aircraft its primary identity, the tail number. You've seen them. The N followed by a series of numbers and letters on an American plane, the G- on a British one, or the D- on a German one. This alphanumeric code is the plane's name, social security number, and passport. It links the physical machine to a legal owner, an operator, a maintenance history, and a country that is legally responsible for its safe operation. This nationality is crucial. It determines which country's aviation authority certifies the plane as airworthy, meaning it's safe to fly. It dictates the rules the pilots must follow and the maintenance standards the mechanics must uphold. If a plane is involved in an accident, its registration tells investigators where to start digging. If it deviates from its flight path, air traffic control knows who to hold accountable. Without this registration, a plane is a legal phantom. It has no right to fly, no certified safety record, and no one to answer for it. So, The gray giant in Hangar 17 wasn't just undocumented. It was an impossibility, a direct contradiction to the entire architecture of modern aviation safety and security. For a plane of that size, a machine clearly built for long-haul, heavy-lift operations, to exist without a registered identity is a logistical and legal nightmare. It implies a deliberate and incredibly sophisticated effort to operate completely off the grid. Such a plane could cross borders without a trace, transport any cargo without scrutiny, and vanish without a whisper. It's the ultimate tool for anyone who needs to move things the world isn't supposed to see. A silent, gray machine in a dusty hangar might seem like a dead end, but to a trained investigator, it's a treasure trove of clues. Within days, a small, discreet team was assembled. An aviation forensics specialist, a veteran mechanic who knew Soviet-era hardware, and Marcus Vance, who had become the unofficial chronicler of the mystery. Their task was to make the silent witness talk. The first identification was swift. The aircraft was an Antonov An-12, a legendary workhorse of the Soviet military and civilian air fleets. Known for its ruggedness and ability to operate from unpaved primitive airstrips, the An-12 was the airborne equivalent of a Kalashnikov rifle. Simple, reliable, and found everywhere from Siberian freight routes to African conflict zones. This fact alone narrowed the geographic and historical scope significantly. This was a plane with a past steeped in grit, not glamour. The investigation began with the paint. The sterile gray was thick and professionally applied, but under a microscopic analysis it told a story. Faint traces of chemical residue suggested that a previous livery had been chemically stripped away, not just painted over. This was an expensive, time-consuming process. Whoever wanted this plane to be anonymous was thorough. Inside, the clues became more specific. The cockpit was a paradox. The main instrument panels were filled with gauges and placards in their original Cyrillic script. But crudely bolted onto the console was a modern, aftermarket GPS system, the kind you could buy online. Scratches on the yokes and worn rudder pedals spoke of thousands of flight hours. This wasn't a showpiece. It was a working tool. The most telling detail was a small, faded sticker on the co-pilot's sun visor for a brand of cigarettes sold almost exclusively in the Balkans. The cavernous cargo bay, while swept clean, couldn't hide its secrets from forensic scrutiny. The team took dozens of dust and residue samples. The lab results that came back weeks later were baffling. They found microscopic traces of soil consistent with Central Africa's Great Rift Valley. They also found minute metallic particles of coltan, a conflict mineral essential for modern electronics, often mined under brutal conditions. And, oddly, they found traces of organic pollen from a species of orchid native only to a specific region of the Amazon basin in Colombia. This plane hadn't just been in one shady corner of the world. It had been in several. But the real breakthrough came from the place a ghostmaker would be most likely to forget. While the primary airframe identification plate had, as expected, been removed from the fuselage, a deep inspection of the number 3 engine required the team to use a borescope to peer inside its complex machinery. And there, etched onto a turbine blade deep within the engine's core, was a part number and a serial number. It was a long shot. Tracing a single component through decades of maintenance logs, transfers, and black market sales would be a nightmare. But it was the first solid thread they had. For the first time, the Phantom had a name, even if it was just a string of numbers on a tiny piece of metal. The paper trail could now begin. Having a serial number from a single turbine blade is like finding a single, unlabeled key to an unknown lock. It's a start, but the odds are astronomical. Yet, in an investigation this cold, it was everything. The team's focus shifted from the dusty hangar to the labyrinthine world of international aviation records. The first step was to contact the engine's manufacturer, the Yevchenko Progress Design Bureau in Ukraine. This was no simple email inquiry. It required navigating a post-Soviet bureaucracy, calling on old contacts, and waiting patiently for someone to feel inclined to dig through archives that were decades old. After weeks of dead ends, a breakthrough came. A senior engineer, intrigued by the story, located the original production log. The engine, serial number and all, had been manufactured in 1978 and installed on an Antonov An-12 with a specific airframe number. That aircraft was delivered to the Soviet Air Force and based with a transport regiment near the Polish border. For a moment, it felt like victory. The Ghost had a birth certificate, but the trail quickly grew cold again. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the regiment was disbanded. Its assets, including a fleet of aging An-12s, were scattered. Official records from the Russian Ministry of Defense showed the aircraft in question was decommissioned in 1994 and officially struck from the register, slated to be scrapped at an aviation boneyard outside of Rostov. As far as the official paper trail was concerned, this plane had been melted down and recycled into pots and pans over 2 decades ago. This is where the real investigation began. The team knew the plane wasn't scrap metal. It was sitting in Hangar 17. They began scouring the shadowy, semi-legal world of aviation registries in so-called flags of convenience, countries with lax regulations where one can register a plane with few questions asked. And there it was. In 1996, an An-12 with the same airframe number briefly appeared on the civil registry of Liberia, registered to a company named West African Air Cargo Limited. The company's address was a post office box in Monrovia. 6 months later, it was deregistered. It reappeared in 1998, this time on the registry of Equatorial Guinea, owned by a different entity, Equatorial Logistics. That company, too, vanished after a year. It was a classic shell game. The plane was being passed through a series of phantom corporations, each one created to hold the asset for a short period before dissolving, creating a new layer of legal insulation. The trail hopped from Africa to a Caribbean P.O. box, then to a company in the UAE that existed only as a name on a brass plate in a Dubai free trade zone. Each transfer was designed to make tracing its real ownership progressively more difficult, until the trail became impossible to follow. The last documented owner, a company registered in Cyprus around 2002, was the final dead end. The company was dissolved in 2004. Its directors were professional nominees who signed documents for thousands of corporations, and its records were legally destroyed. After that, the plane ceased to exist on paper. It had been professionally and methodically laundered, its identity washed clean. Someone had spent a great deal of money and effort not just to hide the plane, but to erase its very history from the record books. The question was no longer who owned it, but why they needed this level of absolute secrecy. When the paper trail dies, a new kind of map must be drawn. One based on evidence, logic, and the dark realities of our world. The An-12 in Hangar 17 was no longer just a plane. It was a ghost shaped by the secrets it once carried. With its official history erased, we are left with the theories, each one a different shade of shadow. Theory 1. The elite smuggler's ghost. This is the most straightforward yet compelling explanation. The An-12 is a smuggler's dream. It can carry over 20 tons of cargo and, crucially, land on short, unprepared dirt strips. This plane was a key that could unlock any remote corner of the globe. The forensic evidence paints a vivid picture. Coltan from Africa, pollen from Colombia. This wasn't a plane used for running counterfeit sneakers. It was a tool for high-stakes international contraband. Imagine a global, illicit supply chain with wings, moving conflict minerals out of the Congo, narcotics out of the Andes, and perhaps something else entirely. The meticulous erasure of its identity wasn't just to avoid taxes. It was to stay invisible to Interpol, the DEA, and every customs agency on the planet. This was the private courier service for a cartel or a syndicate operating at the highest level. Theory 2. The sanction buster and arms merchant. The plane's Soviet origins point directly to another lucrative clandestine market: weapons. After the fall of the USSR, vast arsenals of military hardware, including aircraft like the An-12, flooded the black market. Figures like the infamous arms dealer Victor Bout built entire empires using fleets of such ghost aircraft. Their business model was simple: buy obsolete but functional Soviet planes, scrub their identities, and use them to fly weapons, ammunition, and military hardware into war zones and to nations under strict international arms embargoes. An unregistered An-12 is the perfect vehicle for this. It allows a nation or a non-state actor to arm an ally while maintaining plausible deniability. The plane becomes a sterile, untraceable delivery truck, its flights never officially happening, its cargo manifest a complete fabrication. Its final resting place in a forgotten hangar could simply mean its owner was eventually captured, killed, or retired from the game. Theory 3. The deniable asset of a government agency. This is the most chilling and, in many ways, the most plausible theory. While criminals and arms dealers are skilled at hiding, the sheer clinical precision of this plane's erasure hints at a different level of resources and discipline. This could be the work of a state intelligence agency, the CIA, Russia's SVR, or another nation's clandestine service. In the world of espionage, such an aircraft is known as a deniable asset. It's used for black operations, secretly ferrying special forces teams, evacuating agents from hostile territory, or conducting extraordinary renditions of high-value targets. Its complete lack of identifying marks is its most critical feature. If it were ever forced down or photographed over a foreign country, the government that owned it could plausibly deny any connection. The mix of old Soviet hardware with modern Western GPS is also a hallmark of intelligence operations, using untraceable, robust platforms retrofitted with necessary mission-specific tech. Why abandon it? The reasons are numerous. The program it served may have been terminated. The political climate could have shifted, making such operations too risky. Or perhaps the aircraft itself was somehow compromised, its existence known to a rival agency, making it a liability. In that case, the protocol is simple. Fly it to a quiet, out-of-the-way location and simply walk away, letting the dust of decades become its final camouflage. The operation never happened. The plane never existed. In the end, the ghost of Hangar 17 never gave up its deepest secrets. The investigation, which had burned so brightly with tantalizing clues, eventually cooled into the quiet embers of speculation. The serial number on a single turbine blade had provided a name, but not a confession. The traces of pollen and minerals had sketched a map, but not a destination. The plane remained a silent testament to a world that operates just beneath the surface of our own. What became of the aircraft? For months, it sat in its dusty tomb, a subject of hushed legal battles and jurisdictional squabbles. Without a registered owner to claim it or an official record to condemn it, the N-12 was a legal paradox. Ultimately, the government of the country where it was found, citing aviation safety regulations and the plane's stateless status, made a decision. The machine was carefully dismantled, its parts catalogued and placed in storage, a solution that satisfied regulations without truly solving the riddle. It was a bureaucratic end to a dramatic mystery. But the story of the ghost plane doesn't end with its disassembly. It ends with the questions it leaves behind, hanging in the air like the dust in that long-abandoned hangar. The three theories, smuggler, arms dealer, or spy plane, are not mutually exclusive. Over its long, phantom career, the N-12 could have been all three, sold from one shadowy owner to another as needs and fortunes changed. Its discovery serves as a stark reminder. We live in an age of total surveillance, of GPS tracking and satellite oversight, where we believe everything is known, cataloged, and accounted for. Yet this single machine proved that with enough resources, will, and desperation, it's still possible to vanish from the grid. It makes one wonder, how many other ghosts are out there? How many unmarked planes are currently soaring through the night sky on missions we will never know about? Their holds filled with cargo that could change the course of a small war, fund a criminal empire, or decide the fate of an individual. We will never have the full story of the plane from Hangar 17. Its true history was successfully erased. But its legacy is the unsettling knowledge that the world is not as orderly as we think. Up in the vast, dark sky, there are still secrets, and some of them have wings.